Thank you, by the way, to the organizers for letting me bump up. I was supposed to be the last speaker, but I got too excited, so I asked to be next, so I can go to my next meeting. Today, I'll be discussing something about the Asean, but in this case, it's more on the business side. So, I guess Yabut who's also a member of the debate community, I've seen familiar faces from the speakers today, talked about human trafficking. Today, I'll be talking about business in the ASEAN-centric. You may be aware that the ASEAN integration 2015 is mostly focusing on economic gains. So for a lot of you guys there who are familiar with economics and business, it's basically lowering of tariffs. It's basically allowing more laborers to come in. It's basically allowing professionals to have one single standard of licensure for doctors, accountants, lawyers, for example, so they can practice from one country to another, right? And the most impacting emotional effect of that is the idea that we will likely in the next 10 or 20 years be able to interact more with other nationalities. So it won't be anymore a dream or a convention in the future wherein an Indonesian or a Malaysian will sit side by side together in an office. And as you may see, a lot of multinational companies are setting up their own headquarters these days, not just in Singapore, but also in Kuala Lumpur, and of course, let's say, for example, in Fort in Manila. So today what I'll be sharing are basically, and I hope it doesn't bore you guys, basically, what do the other Southeast Asian people think of Filipinos when it comes to the workplace? And I'm taking off my experience based on having been in Kuala Lumpur for a year now, and having worked with one of the most ASEAN companies in the world, which is AirAsia, of which we have an ongoing seat sale, by the way, by AirAsia. But more than that, the idea here is not to demean other nationalities, but the idea here is that because we're all Filipinos here, I'd like to differentiate what separates us from the rest, and what can we work on to become better workers and be able to make a better ASEAN 2015. Alright? So, the title of my talk is called From Grid to Great. It's basically lessons and unsolicited advice taken from the Apprentice Asia. If you may be familiar with the show, there were 30,000 applicants who joined, and this was shown last year on AXN. From 30,000 applicants, we were trimmed down all across Asia from 1,000, and finally, they got the 12 most good-looking contestants to be on the show. It wasn't a big issue for me, I just had to prove I was really smart. And luckily, I came through. So if you also have any questions later on, if I may not be able to answer your questions, my social media accounts are here. Alright, next slide please. Alright, the first thing I'd like to share, and this is specific about the Filipino, is the idea that preparation always trumps discarte. So I've always been talking about the idea that discarte is a Filipino word that no English counterpart has. Right? If you look at the dictionary, there's no counterpart for this. Maybe the closest one is the word resourcefulness. And the idea here is that if there is a problem in front of you at that very moment, being madiscarte means you're able to find a solution given what you have at that very moment. Right? That's discarte. And that's how a lot of Southeast Asians see a lot of Filipinos. Because the Filipinos are more Latin in culture compared to their more Southeast Asian or Chinese counterparts. That makes us deeply rooted to the idea that we don't need to prepare for the biggest things of our lives. If you have a big presentation the next day, if you have a big meeting the next day, most Filipinos are perceived, especially those who are also even working abroad, as those who have this madiscarte factor. And I'll give you an anecdote why this doesn't work and how I learned this very importantly in my case in the organization. Next slide. So you guys have seen the Apprentice US and UK. Some of you, Apprentice UK is happening right now, season 10, really, really good contestants. I'll give you an anecdote which proved for in my case that preparation is really important. And when I was in college and university, I've been a big fan of the show. I've seen all 154 episodes of The Apprentice. So you've seen Apprentice US, Italy, Czech Republic, Spain, all these apprentices, I've seen every episode of it. And what is the value of that? Even if I didn't know that there was going to be Apprentice Asia or Apprentice Philippines, it psychologically prepared me to understand how to back it out in the boardroom. And that for me is very important because even if there were other contestants who were better or smarter than I am, I felt that I knew what to say in the boardroom immediately because I know the patterns of what other contestants do. And that was non-deliberate preparation. But I'll give you the more important part. And that's next animation, please. You guys who know this person? So, admittedly, I don't know who this guy was until I joined the Apprentice Asia. So he's my boss, it's Mr. Tony Fernandez. the CEO of Air Asia today, I didn't know who he was. So when I found out he was going to host the TV show, I thought one way of finding out who was going to be a potential employer by stalking him online. So obviously you have to go to YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook because that's the only way I can find out more about him. And I was much at disadvantage. Why? Because a lot of the Indonesians, Singaporeans, and Malaysians knew him from the very start. Because in the Malaysian Peninsula, he's pretty much a baby. And for that reason, I felt that I had to do something to know more about my potential employer. So I went to YouTube, looked at 34 videos of who Mr. Tony Fernandez was. And lo and behold, I realized that in most of his interviews, there is usually a pattern in his speech. He mentions the word accountability or leadership 4 to 5 times per interview. He mentions the word youth or youth and management, for example, 5 to 6 times per interview. Knowing that there's a pattern in his interviews, I realized that these were the same qualities that he was looking for the new testament. And those were the same qualities I had to show when I was in the boardroom. And that for me is the value of preparation. Because you can never be prepared for your next task, and even if the other contestants knew more about Mr. Tony Fernandez, that level of preparation may be better in competing in the boardroom itself. And for that reason, and I think Benjamin Franklin says it best, right? Failing to prepare is preparing to fail. And I guess that's one thing that a lot of Filipinos have to learn more between discarding and preparation. Second slide, next one. Sorry, before that, I'd like to share one thing that I've learned when I was studying. In my free time in KL, I tried to enroll myself into culinary school. And I realized that the first day of school, there was one concept that my chef instructor told to us that I think can be related much to the corporate world. And that's the concept of mise en place. Who here cooks? Is there anyone here? Who here eats? Obviously a lot of you. But anyway, if you're in the culinary school, mise en place basically means in French, to set in place. Before you even turn on that stove, before it even gets hot, for example, you have to make sure that every ingredient is already in place. So the onions are chopped, the garlics are chopped, the meat is marinated, salt and peppers in front of you, because every simple change in temperature can ruin the dish. And I think mise en place is one example of why life is a battlefield that you need to prepare for, as if you were preparing your own kitchen. So here's an example. What am I making here? What do you think? Pasta, right? Shrimp with pesto, etc. This is an example of a mise en place. It's very, very simple. And I think it's a metaphor for a life of a grade school student. So you don't need to prepare much. Even if the oil is already being cooked, you can just go to the refrigerator and get some stuff. You can go to the cabinet and get the shrimp and all these things. That's fine. But I think the adult life, which is your life, guys, is like this. So next one. I saw already one, so I go. Anyway, but the idea here is simple, right? Mise en place basically means preparing everything before you start. So who here is already working? Alright. One thing that people notice among Southeast Asia is the idea that when we go to work, we immediately answer emails. Right? I think it's not only among Southeast Asians, but also it's a universal experience. But by the time you answer your emails, and this is very relevant for most corporate workers out there, the moment you answer your emails and you see it's already 10 o'clock in the morning, you've realized that you've wasted so much time answering emails that were sent by other people that are not making money for business at all. What I would do, and what more successful people do, is the idea that before they even open their laptop, they first list down the top 10 things that they need to accomplish that day, and they determine what needs to get done that day. That's an example of a mise en place that I think a lot of people have to adapt before they engage with work. Alright, number 2 that I've learned in the workplace, it's not about working hard, but working smart. And again, this is very, very typical of Southeast Asia, especially in the East. The idea that we have this belief, even Japan and China is also known more for this, the idea that if we have to go to work, we have to go at 7 in the morning and go home at 10 or midnight. Right? If you go to Japan, for example, there's this concept of capsule hotels, wherein because the workers have missed the train, they'd rather sleep in this cheap box that they can use so they can go back to work the next day. Alright? But really, there's a big difference between working hard and working smart. Someone who works hard can finish a task for 12 hours. Someone who works smart can finish the same task for only 4 hours. And an example of this is that if you apply for a passport and you take pride of lining up for 6 hours, sleep, bring your own ensaymada and mineral water and pillow, just to brave the DFA, that is working hard. But working smart is going one night and registering for a passport and getting that passport done in a matter of 2 hours. Working smart is using Waze before you fly through EDSA versus, giving it all to fate and having this bahala na attitude that I can just brave through EDSA even if there's much traffic. And why am I sharing this? Because a lot of the Filipinos, again, have this kind of propensity that they think it's all about spending more time at work versus really making your work smarter. Next slide. I'll give an example again, and I'll give this an anecdote from the Apprentice Asia. Can you show first the first picture? So this is me, the other contestant. And one fun experience I really have from the show is after having seen all the episodes from the other franchises, I realized the biggest problem with most contestants are the household chores. So a tip to season 2 aspirants, if you want to join next year, you're only going to be given 1 washing machine, 1 ironing board, 1 iron, and all 16 contestants or 12 contestants are going to share it with one another. And that's a big problem because you don't want to problematize that. What your real problem is to win the show and focus your energy on the show. You're only going to be allowed to bring 3 suits, for example, which means you have to wash your clothes every night, and you also have to iron your clothes every night. But because I knew this was going to be an issue, I brought my own weapon, which is the steam iron. So have you guys used the steam iron? Alright. A steam iron is very good because you can use it anywhere as long as you have a plug and you have water. So during moments, and this is where looking at the bigger picture is really, really important for all of us. When I knew that the Apprentice Asia is a TV show and not just a show about smart people, I knew there would be problems about cameras and lights. Whenever there was a long moment, the contestants couldn't speak to one another based on the rules. And whenever that happens, which happens every day, I was always busy steam ironing my clothes. What's the meaning of that word? It's time? Yes. Okay, last line. Steam ironing my clothes. And for that reason, that really allowed me and that really benefited me a lot to work smart because I knew that in the morning, while all other contestants were already ironing their clothes, I was the only guy in the kitchen countertop sipping my hot mug of coffee and trying to strategize how to take out Andrea or Alex in the competition. Last one is where I end now. By the 8th episode, I knew that the biggest problem with most contestants is stamina. The winner wasn't about who's going to be the smartest, but the winner was about who had the most amount of sleep, who had the most amount of nutritious breakfast. So by the 8th episode, I brought out again my magic weapon, and that was extra jaws. So before the producers would say that the tasks were about to start, I would get a mineral bottle of water, hide in the cubicle, and put in the extra jaws. And I was the only guy who's like on drugs. Because I was the only one who had the energy. But the concept I'm trying to share here, maybe as the last lesson I'm going to share, is the idea that most of us millennials and Southeast Asians have this tendency to believe that if you're given a task, you immediately jump into execution without even looking at strategy. You may be the fastest driver, you may be the most efficient driver, but if you're